All right, so I think we're going to go on to introduce Sarah, and we're going to do a little bit of the art of the bayou.
Hi, everyone. Happy Thursday. Yes, so this week we're focusing on the art of the bayou. So I thought I'd start with a little history of Louisiana and New Orleans. So here, I'll close my camera so you can see the map behind me. So the first sign of permanent settlement was about 5,500 years ago. It was the Archaic period, and those were First Nations people. This was obviously pre-Columbian. Then if we jump ahead a bit, in 1200, or around that time, the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex took form. And that's a term that historians have given to different groups in the Mississippian era. The Mississippian area that focused on maize agriculture and had kind of a chiefdom style social organization. And so you can see on the map that the Mississippi River flows into the Delta, and this whole area is sometimes thought of as one larger region. So the 16th century is when European influence began. La Louisiane became a colony of France in 1682, named after King Louis XIV, the King of France at the time. Then in 1763, it was passed on to Spain. And of course, then the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, which made Louisiana a part of the southern United States. Antebellum Louisiana was a slave state, with roughly 47% of the population being enslaved in 1860. And in 1862, Union troops strategically took control over New Orleans, which was the largest port in the South. As you can see, the reason why I kind of went through that quick history is to show how many cultures have had their influence on the state, and particularly the city of New Orleans. So even today, if you visit, you can still see architecture resembling Europe in the Vieux Carré or the French Quarter. And there are just the unique cultures of the Creole and the Cajun. It's an epicenter for jazz music, which was created by Black Americans. There's so many intertwining cultures that, in my opinion, it's the most unique city in the United States. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Collette Pope Heldner, who we're focusing on as an artist of the Bayou and New Orleans. So this is a painting of her with her dog done by her husband, Knute Heldner. Colette was born in Waupaca, Wisconsin in 1902. And shortly after her father died, her mother moved the family to Duluth, Minnesota. And her mother worked at a tobacco stand at a hotel to support her family. And Colette, wanting to help and being very independent and strong-willed, cut her hair short and applied for a delivery boy job for Western Union. However, her mother ended up recognizing her on a delivery run to the hotel that she had worked at and had the authorities bring her home. But she was interested in art and took lessons at a small studio in Duluth, which is actually where she met her future husband, Knute Heldner, a fellow artist hailing from Sweden. The couple then eloped in 1923 and moved to New Orleans to escape the Minnesota winter. And at this point, Knute was already a popular impressionist artist in New Orleans, and this had an effect on Colette's style. So the couple split their time between Duluth and New Orleans, but Colette was particularly captured by the charm and uniqueness of the southern city. She said it was, quote, compelling, completely fascinating, narrow streets, balconies, plants, clotheslines by the galleries, dirty-faced Italian babies, perfect Murillo models, vile odors on the one, and exquisite perfumes on the other. So this is called Mardi Gras Day, painted in 1927, a few years after the couple first moved to New Orleans. And as I mentioned, Colette was inspired by her husband's style and the training that he gave her. And this painting is very classic impressionist, with the small brush strokes that blend the color into kind of a wash. And you can especially notice this in the archway, where the shadowed parts are painted with a significantly darker colored paint than the parts that are supposed to be in the sun. But when you look at the painting as a whole, it just kind of blends seamlessly from light to dark. And this is, of course, Mardi Gras. And if you've ever had the pleasure of being at Mardi Gras in New Orleans, you know this is a very familiar scene with people flooding the streets in colorful outfits and decorations covering the city. So the Heldners traveled throughout Europe from 1929 to 1932, and Colette was really inspired by the architecture and the general cafe lifestyle. This painting is called Old Absinthe House, done in 1947 after they got back to the States. And this painting depicts, as it's called, an old absinthe house on Bourbon Street in the French Quarter. And again, this really showcases her impressionist style, which can especially be seen in the texture of the pavement and how those small brushstrokes really emphasize that texture. And this painting really epitomizes New Orleans because, like the quote I said earlier, she mentions these narrow streets, balconies, plants, and kind of talked about this juxtaposition of the city. And we can see that with the people hanging around the absinthe house. You know, you can see the two nuns walking in the bottom left of the painting that represent kind of the religious and the pious aspect to the city, but it is this absinthe house, you know, which can represent something else entirely. And this painting uses a lot of grayish brown colors, especially towards the bottom of the painting. And it gives it kind of a, dare I almost say, dirty or rugged feel to it. And I even found a different copy online that shows this painting even darker than this version. But then you see you have the pink sky and the bright blue shutters on the building. So it does really highlight this kind of juxtaposition of the city. So this is a similar style of painting. This is called Café Lafitte of Bourbon Street. And as you can see, Colette was really known for her iconic scenes of the French Quarter. And we could see the influences of France here with the cobblestone street and the striped awnings in the background. But you really see the multiculturalism of New Orleans, not only in the people in the picture, you can see, you know, the sultry women, the sailors in uniform, the street vendors, but even in the foliage and the weather. You have the palm trees, which show kind of a Caribbean influence, and the sky looks as if a tropical storm is about to hit or a hurricane. You know, these things where you have this kind of European architecture, but it's very unique with the foliage and the weather. So Café Lafitte is still open to this day and is actually the oldest gay bar in the French Quarter. It opened in 1933 at the end of Prohibition, and both Tennessee Williams and Truman Capote were regulars of the bar. I thought was a really interesting little fun fact. So now we're steering away from New Orleans and into the Bayou with, this is Sabbath Deep South, painted in 1949. And this is still impressionist and actually much more blended compared to some of the other city paintings where you might be able to see the individual brush strokes. This is more kind of a wash of color, especially in the weeping willow trees. And something that both Colette and Knute Heldner were known for is their use of color. Most paintings of the swamp and the bayou by other artists at this time were done in really muted earth tones. But as you can see with the plants and the colorful church outfits, Heldner uses these bright pops of color in the piece. And this brighter palette was adopted by artists after her. So I would be remiss not to mention John James Audubon in our talk of the Bayou. He was an ornithologist, a naturalist, and a painter of French and American citizenship. And his life plan was to document all types of American birds. But he spent lots of time in New Orleans and the Gulf states. And this is his depiction of the Louisiana blue heron, a bird found in the Gulf states. And as well, if you're ever in New Orleans, I highly recommend visiting Audubon Park. It's in the middle of the city, named after him. It's a huge, beautiful park filled with, unsurprisingly, lots of birds. So as you can see, New Orleans and the Bayou are rooted in history and multiculturalism. It's the birthplace of jazz, and it's just a very special place. And I hope today you got some insight into the uniqueness of the area. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Sarah. That was fascinating. Do we have any questions from our audience? Are there any questions in the chat?
I had a question, Sarah. Was that the Creole lady painting, or were you able to find the Creole lady painting?
I'm sorry, which painting?
Holding the dog. The picture where she's holding where woman is holding the dog.
Yes, that's Collette Heldner, and that was a painting of the done by her husband. Yes.
I was trying to find the Creole lady, and I couldn't I couldn't see a picture anywhere online.
The Creole Lady. Let's see. Let me see if I can find it and pull it up. Is it done by Heldner?
Yes, Colette.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so why don't we, we'll see if we can find it, Sarah, and then we can shoot a note out. Are there any other
Yep.
questions?